Hello, my name is Joseph Dismore. I would like to give a little discussion today about the self-determinate will, the magical will, the pure will, and the natural will. According to Francis Rebellius, who lived between 1494 and 1553 in France, he had established a formal career in writing, philosophy, thought, and thoughts about his day. In one of his writings, he was writing about the Abbey of Theleme, built by the giant Gargantua. His main premise in the Abbey's description of Theleme's description was, do what thou wilt. Will there means thelema. It is a Greek word meaning thelema, and thelema is Greek for the English word meaning to will. I would also like to point out that in the time of Aleister Crowley, he formulated a book in the early 1900s called Liber Vel Legis, or the Book of the Law, which was founded mainly on the principles of the true will. It's a thelemic principles. Again, the word thelema means will. And I would say that according to the Oxford English Dictionary, the definition that I'm using for the word will is the faculty by which a person decides on and initiates action. So a self-determinate will would be the person initiating their own actions by their own self-determinate choice. The doctrines of will or thelema, according to Crowley, is a central doctrine of Aleister Crowley's Liber Vel Legis, or Book of the Law, in whose system the central doctrine is that knowing one's true will is the ultimate purpose and destiny of every being. This is summed up in the following phrases from Liber Legis. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Liber Al, chapter 1, verse 40. Love is the law, love under will. Liber Al, chapter 1, verse 57. The word of the law is thelema. Liber Al, chapter 1, verse 39. There is no law beyond do what thou wilt. All, Liber Al, chapter 3, verse 60. The true will is a magical idea that can be described in its dynamic aspect as the singular path of possible action that encounters no resistance in going because it is supported by the inertia of the whole universe. A man who is doing his true will has the inertia of the universe to assist him, and that's found in Magic and Theory and Practice, theorem number 9, page 15. True will can never be contradicted by another person, or another person should not try to interfere with another person's true will, for that each person's character and will is absolutely unique, and it's a unique career for that true will and its passage through infinite space. Hence, to follow one's true will means to respect all other people's true wills, described as love is the law, love under will. Again, Aleister Crowley states, Know firmly, O my son, that the true will cannot err, for it is thine appointed course in heaven, in whose order is perfection. Liber Aleph, page 13. Again, Crowley states concerning the true will that the most common cause of failure in life is ignorance of one's true will, or of the means by which to fulfill that will. Magic in Theory and Practice, Book 4, page 127. If we go to the philosopher Johann Gottlieb Fichte, he explains the nature of spontaneous activity of the pure ego. Now, the pure will comes forth from the pure ego, just as the natural will comes forth from the natural man. Now, the absolute or pure ego is not the individual finite self, but an infinite, better, unlimited activity. As spontaneous activity, the pure ego does not exist for itself. It comes to exist for itself as an ego only in the intellectual intuition by which the philosopher, in transcendental reflection, apprehends the ego's spontaneous activity. So the more we reflect upon the activity of not only our thoughts and our own intellect and of our wills, the more these wills can be expressed and become more from the baser will or the natural will, which thinks about things like the food requirements of the day, the necessities for the everyday daily activities, and it gives us an insight into a deeper, more primal force of will called the self-determinate will, which through self-determination comes forth through the reflection of those qualities of will that pertain unto aspects and the more of self-determination, and the more we think about them and reflect about them, the more we express that true will. If we find in Fichtey's transcendental philosophy the original duplicity of intelligence will by Gunther Zoller on page 79 through 81, in section 5 called Thinking and Willing. The intellectualist restriction of the practicality of the subject holds equally for Fichtey's usage of the term willing, to describe the moment of resolve and concentration of force involved in the mind's passing over from indeterminacy to determinacy. So there's a choice there. Whereas the act of willing imposes a freely willed limitation to one path of thinking at the expense of all others. He also speaks of the thinking of the willing. Thinking of the willing is to be understood not objectively as though willing were being thought about, but subjectively, as referred to the kind of thinking that willing is. Fichte regards willing as determined, resolved thinking. Yet Fichte also considered willing as something to be encountered by thinking, as something that is found and then taken up through thinking. The relation between thinking and willing is thus not one of the ultimate identity, but one of mutual requirement. In Fichte's own words, I will insofar as I think myself as willing, and I think myself as willing insofar as I will. So the more we will, the more we think ourselves willing. His point here seems to be that the doing of the willing needs to be seen, that is through, in order to have reality for the eye. In part 6, pure willing and thinking. Fichte's account of the relation between willing and thinking in the new presentation of the Wissenschaftslehre is ultimately grounded in a distinction he draws between empirical willing and pure willing. The distinction follows closely the ones introduced by Immanuel Kant between Willkür, choice, and Wille, will, with the former standing for the power of deciding between alternatives, or the choice, and the latter referring to an original pure self-determination, or the will preceding the opening up of any alternatives. So it's not true willing when a person has to think about willing. It's spontaneous, the act of willing is, before the actual thought of what the choices would be. That's pure willing. And we find again on page 81, yet pure willing, although presupposed in all thinking, is itself affected by the conditions of thinking. In line with the intellectual nature of the I, pure willing is taken up by thinking. It is brought under the form of thinking in the process. Pure willing, the universality, presupposed ultimate source of determination, is itself determined by being thought or reflected upon. So we can reach the source of the ultimate source of thinking and willing by thinking upon what we are willing to make a choice of. It is can be both pure will or the act of spontaneity before the choice came, or it can be more of a natural will by the act of choices we make. And I thank you for giving me the time today. Once again, as I discover more in these philosophers about the nature of the will, I shall try to make another episode. Goodbye.